Hello, and welcome to Cutting Through. I'm Mitchell Plitnick. On January 8th, in Kew Gardens Hills, Queens, New York, an area that I'm intimately familiar with, very close to where I grew up, there was a protest outside of a, a building that functions as both a synagogue and a school, and a counter protest. And both of these things were happening around an event that was happening in the building. And as usual, of course, it involved Israel and its occupation of Palestinian land and became, in the end, of course, a political issue for the new mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani. And, I should preface all of this with the fact that it really does seem that the pro-Israel community is determined to have this issue dog Mamdani every single day of his administration. And so far, he's done a remarkable job of addressing it, dealing with it, and moving on, and not spending the ridiculously inordinate amount of time that these people are trying to make it take, and instead doing what he was elected to do, which is being the mayor of New York City. Not somebody who's there to adjudicate, comment on, or even have really anything to do with Israel and Palestine. That being said, the event that took place at in Kew Gardens Hills was another event where Israeli organizations were promoting the sale of land in Israel and in the occupied territories. According to the Jerusalem Post, properties that were being highlighted for sale at this event in Kew Gardens Hills included properties in Ma'ale Adumim and Modi'in, both of which are illegal settlements beyond the Green Line, beyond Israel. There's just no question under international law that these are illegal settlements. There used to be once upon a time a consensus on that point. Israel has simply denied reality enough so that its sycophants have managed to convince too many people that there's a dispute. There is no dispute. These are blatantly illegal. The uh, the event in this case, unlike previous ones that were held by pro-Israel organizations, these were business events. This was a business event. The according again to the Jerusalem Post, um, the uh, the two businesses that were hosting this event were Mortgage Israel and Tuvach Shili, which is a real estate company, and Mortgage Israel is obviously a mortgage company in Israel. They're very big companies, do a lot of work in selling land in Israel and the occupied West Bank. And so naturally, there was a protest. The protest was led by the groups in New York, Palestine Solidarity activists, who have been quite vocal about being aggressive at protests, in my view, rather foolishly. I'll get to that in a minute. And there was a good deal of coverage because some of what they did, one of the chants that apparently caught on with some in their crowd and not so much with others, although you wouldn't know that from the coverage, um, was say it loud, say it clear, we support Hamas here. That was what they said. And of course, there was immediately outrage and, oh, how could you say this? Which is understandable. So let me point out the first I heard of it, uh, um, I heard that there was a protest and counter protest, but this slogan I became aware of because of a an activist, a liberal Zionist peace activist named Hadar Suskind, who's rather big in that world, who I've known for years, and he uh, he immediately posted about this in reaction, where he said, "This is utterly sickening. While the right to protest in America is sacrosanct, I will never turn a blind eye to this sort of extremism. Hamas is designated as a foreign terrorist organization for very good reasons." I responded to this that I didn't care whether Hamas is designated a terror organization. I think that's a ridiculous point. I think it's a silly one to make, given how completely subjective and political that list is, including, many different groups. The question is just who we like and who we don't. Who we call a terrorist, who's a freedom fighter, etc. We know this. these are phrases and lists and with legal ramifications that we should not have. They try to simplify what are in essence very, very complicated questions. Um, who's a terrorist? I mean, would not just to use the most blatant example that we should all be able to relate to in the United States, do we not think that the British in the late 18th century would have considered the Continental Army terrorists? I mean, they used very similar tactics. They tended to, hide in the shadows, use sneak attacks. They attacked pro-British civilians. Was not nothing about what they did sets them apart from who we call terrorists today. And certainly the British Crown would have. So I'm not trying to make light of any of this stuff, but this language is just, it's tired, it's useless, it conceals a lot more than it reveals. And it's overly simplistic, and it really works against anybody getting to the bottom of any of these issues. So dismiss that part of it. I also went on to say that I do very much care that Hamas is a reactionary organization that has committed severe crimes against both Israeli and Palestinian people over the years. And explain it. I don't have the visceral reaction that Hadar has to Tanya's stuff. I do think the people who are chanting that are horribly misguided. I think it is quite possible that that was started or egged on by provocateurs among their groups. I have made the comment before that I've seen these groups. They've talked about wanting to make people afraid, wanting to make people nervous as if they think that's going to advance their cause. Sure sounds to me like somebody's feeding them some real bad ideas. Maybe they just have it on their own. But we have a strong history in this country of provocateurs doing exactly that kind of thing. So who can say for certain? In any case, that chant is stupid, and as I put it, is a short-sighted sacrifice of the moral high ground that in any reasonable power analysis of the Israel-Palestine issue in the United States, the moral high ground is the only real advantage supporters of Palestinian rights in the U.S. have. So, I mean, whoever's doing this is either badly misguided or getting some really bad advice and pushed in maybe directions that they don't really want to go, no matter what they think. But I think we also need to understand a lot better than we do who Hamas is and what Hamas is. They, they are seen among many supporters of Palestinian rights as the leading organization that offers resistance to Israel. Now, whether their particular kind of resistance is the most effective is a matter of a lot of debate among Palestinians. But and without a doubt, look, what we can say as a bottom line is that they are guilty of war crimes. They are a reactionary and oppressive group, as I said. But they are also a group that has support among Palestinians. We have to recognize this. When we look at the most recent polls, for example, out of Palestine, they really do show that, Hamas is not, overwhelmingly popular by any means, but people do support them. They support the fact that they're standing up to Israel, which, stands in stark contrast to, for example, Fatah, which is not standing up to Israel, which is in fact collaborating with Israel. We need to understand that no matter what people want to say, Hamas is not ISIL. They are not the Islamic State. They are not just wanton terrorists looking to kill people, nor are they people whose agenda is all about killing Jews. The people who are saying this don't know Hamas. They don't understand the Palestinian dynamic. They don't understand Palestinian politics. They don't care to look at it. They simply respond to the crimes, which are undeniable, that Hamas has committed. But the Hamas and groups like Hamas always appear in any situation of occupation, dispossession, oppression, whatever, apartheid, settler colonialism, wherever you oppress people, people resist. And when resistance happens, sometimes resistance takes some really ugly forms. And sometimes those ugly forms become horrifyingly criminal, as they did on October 7th, 2023. There's no question of the war crimes that were committed that day. We can talk about how the dynamics work. We can talk about, and we need to have an understanding of how these things happen, but we don't need to forgive those actions, and we don't need to condone them. That being said, we do have to understand that these things all come out of what has been done to the Palestinian people. Now, we can go back and forth about this stuff, but one of the most notable points about this event was that everybody got bent out of shape about this chant about Hamas, and I can understand that, except when it's only applied to one side. Because at this same event were people holding a Jewish Defense League uh, flag, and people really making some horrifyingly ugly chants themselves on the pro-Israel side. Which, and incidentally, that crowd was about the same size as the Palestine support side. So there were protesters, there were counter protesters. Both groups were pretty big, and but there was very little reporting on this. The New York Times finally mentioned it at the end of their coverage in a long article about this incident. Um, Towards the end of the article, they say, and I'm quoting here, the pro-Israel demonstrators chanted "Death to Palestine," "We love ICE," and expletive-laced slogans about Mr. Zohran Mamdani, the mayor of New York. They also threatened to rape or kill individual people in and around the crowd of protesters, including a journalist, and wave flags in support of President Trump and of the far-right Orthodox Kach movement, which was banned. I mean, this is how bad Kach was. This was banned from participating in Israeli elections in the 1980s for inciting racism. Mayor Kahane was kicked out of the Knesset for that. I mean, this should be at least as appalling. This is just pure racism and pure hate. It's not a response to the fact that to living in refugee camps, Israelis live fine. As fine as anybody in the world. Of course, people are upset. People are angry. People are angry about October 7th. People are angry about years of conflict, et cetera, et cetera. But come on, this is just pure racism. And yet, nobody talks about this. But as soon as we hear Hamas, everybody goes off the deep end. The double standard is plain. I would like to quote right now Professor Shaul Magid, one of the leading scholars of Jewish studies in the country. And Shaul Magid says the following: the fact that too many in the Jewish community remained unsatisfied with Mamdani's unequivocal condemnation, and Mamdani did unequivocally condemn the Hamas slogan, is reprehensible but not unexpected, as it suggests that the issue isn't really Mamdani's lack of condemning, but not supporting, such things as globalize the Intifada, but rather Mamdani himself. Shaul has an excellent read on this whole incident that I will link to in the description on his own Substack. But it's basically revolves around the double standards and the fact that both Jews and the mainstream media focused on this pro-Hamas chant, which is, I get it. It's offensive. It's not more offensive than the things I just read to you that the Times described. Okay, and were there people in the pro-Israel crowd that did not participate in those, that probably told those people, "Shut up, you're hurting our cause"? I'm sure there were, as there were in the pro-Palestine crowd. That I know. From firsthand reporting, and people who were there and part of that crowd have told me that they didn't agree with it. As a matter of fact, this is part of a dynamic that reporter Brian Grimm notes when he's talking about this. He says that a small handful of protesters managed to get a chant going about supporting Hamas because they're trying to call the question for people like Mamdani and AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and force them into a maximalist position, or more likely, force them to condemn the chant and then use that as an organizing vehicle to channel people away from them and toward their group. He's right. This is how sectarian groups often operate, with trying to be as outrageous as possible so that these people who they feel are insufficiently are in political positions of relative power but are insufficiently radical, as if those as if they could be more radical and still be in positions of political power. But okay. Um, they're trying to push them either to become more radical or to show, oh, look, and I've seen this all over the place. Look, they're really Zionist. Mamdani's really a Zionist. AOC is really a Zionist. They're really, they're not dedicated to the Palestinian cause there, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's such nonsense, but it's very real. And I think that is what you've seen. That's the dynamic you're seeing in the groups that were there in Kew Gardens Hills. Grimm also gives some credence to what I initially suspected and still think is a distinct possibility of what happened here when he says that that's why sometimes the people leading the chants are actual cynical provocateurs working on behalf of the organization being protested, but often not, and it can be hard to tell. That's what he says. And he's right. I mean, just because people are doing something stupid and self-defeating does not mean they are being pushed to do that by some double agent. The point I think that's important, and the point that needs to be taken away from this, is that uh, there is a clear double standard. I mean, everybody went absolutely nuts over the Hamas, the pro-Hamas statement. And again, I'm going to repeat it. I understand. I am no fan of Hamas. Most Palestinians I know are not fans of Hamas, although many of them do see Hamas as the only group that is standing up to Israel, and so they're not going to condemn them. Some of them, some of them feel that, first of all, you can look at the polls in Palestine. The most recent one, and I'll link to that also in the description, shows that there's a good deal of support for what Hamas did on October 7th, despite the result. But I think the key point is that most people don't believe that Hamas actually committed the crimes that it's been accused of. And I think that's important because it tells you something about the Palestinian people. They're not saying those crimes are okay. They're saying they don't think they happened. They're wrong. The evidence for those crimes, like so many Israeli crimes in the genocide that has happened in Gaza, was actually provided in many cases by Hamas and other fighters that day themselves, who uploaded it to Telegram and other social media networks. You can look at the Al Jazeera documentary on October 7th. They have that evidence. The evidence is there. That being said, this is where, in the post-truth world that we are now living. And I do think it's important that many Palestinians who support what Hamas did on October 7th believe that those crimes didn't happen, that they are being falsely accused of those crimes. But even Palestinians who believe they did happen and do not support them and think, Hamas was wrong and horribly wrong and criminal to do those things, still look at Hamas as having breached the fence to Gaza, having, stood up to Israel and being able to come into what is Palestine, proper, beyond the fence that Israel has erected beyond them. They saw that as a point of pride. That's why a lot of people initially on October 7th, before the full scope of what happened was clear, were celebrating it because it was simply a matter of Palestinians breaking out from occupation in their eyes. Now, I'm not saying you have to buy that narrative by any means. I am saying that to try and oversimplify this into Hamas being, just these crazed lunatic killers is just, it's not accurate, and it's not a helpful way to approach the issue. Okay, I'm not saying Hamas deserves exoneration. I am saying Hamas should be brought to justice. The people who committed crimes on October 7th, just like the Israelis who have committed so many crimes since October 7th, should all be brought to justice, should all be tried, and the context of why they did what they did, like any other trial, should be there and should be judged within that context. We have to ask, where is the right to resist, which Palestinians most clearly have? Where does that right stop? At what point does your violent action exceed what you're permitted to do under the condition of the right to resist? And the willful killing of civilians is certainly beyond that line. And Hamas certainly did that, as did Israel. And we need to bring all of that together. But being appalled by the support for Hamas, but not being appalled, not just, here we're talking about people who were supporting the JDL and Kach and these extreme far right groups that have even been condemned in Israel. But let's talk about who committed the crimes. When we talk about who committed these crimes that we find so appalling, we have Hamas and other Palestinian militant groups and other Palestinians on one side, and we have, I hate to tell you, the Israel Defense Forces on the other. Okay, so it's not even, and these are people who are now supporting, this pro-Israel, the pro-Israel radicals in that crowd in Kew Gardens Hills. They were supporting not just the IDF who committed the genocide that we look at, but groups that are far more extreme than them who literally are out there trying to advocate for the complete expulsion of every Palestinian from historic Palestine, if not their slaughter, and are threatening the people who they're standing up against with rape and killing. And I mean, what they did was demonstrable. I mean, I would argue it's demonstrably worse. It's certainly no better than the pro-Hamas chant, but somehow that doesn't get people up in arms. It doesn't even get a comment from Jewish Americans to say, yeah, our side did this and it's bad too, and that's why we're condemning the pro-Hamas. I mean, that's a valid argument to say, yeah, we have jerks on our side too. We're jerks on your side. All of them need to be condemned. That would be a valid argument from Jews who are concerned about what happened in Kew Gardens Hills. We can talk about, oppressor and oppressed and these various things, but that's certainly a more reasonable argument than only condemning the one side, which is what happened here. And politically speaking, Zohran Mamdani did exactly what he should do. He condemned the hate speech. He correctly did not call it anti-Semitism, although AOC did. I'm sorry, support for Hamas may be vile, if you want to call it that. It may be misguided. It may even be immoral, if you want to say. You want to make that argument, that's fine. But inherently saying I support Hamas is not inherently anti-Semitic. It's not. Because Hamas is not an inherently anti-Semitic organization, despite what people want to argue about the charter. They are not motivated by hatred of Jews. They are motivated by liberating Palestine. The JDL is an explicit hate group. Kach is an explicit hate group. The Israeli government, I can't say that they take a stand that's an explicit. I think that, in practice they are. And you can say in practice Hamas hates Jews, that many members of Hamas and the leadership or whatever, if you can make that argument on logical grounds, make it. That's fine. But the people saying that they support Hamas are saying they support violence against Israel. That's what they're saying. They support the violent resistance against Israel, and they are not bothered by the fact that Israeli civilians may be targeted in that violent resistance. I mean, unless they really believe that Israeli civilians are not targeted by Hamas, which I don't think too many of them do. So, but they're not talking about targeting Jews. Okay. When, but I've been among the people in Kahanachai and Kach and the JGL. I've been among those folks. I know what they think. To a person, okay, they are all racist. But fine, if you want to say that what they say is not anti-Palestinian, is not anti-Palestinian racism, make that case, fine. But don't tell me that it's automatically anti-Semitic because people say they support Hamas. You want to, again, if you want to say it's vile, immoral, horrible, all of those things, you can make that case. Okay, but something being vile and also being directed at Israel does not add up to anti-Semitism, and that's exactly the equation that we have to get rid of. Okay, it takes more than that. You have to have animus towards Jews. And so far, I haven't seen that. I have seen the animus in this crowd towards Israel and towards anyone who supports Israel, which certainly is not limited to Jews by any means. Many more supporters of Israel in this country are not Jewish than are Jewish. So, these are the things that we need to come back to, but certainly the double standard. Now, in terms of Mamdani, again, coming back to that, he did not call it anti-Semitic. He did call it hateful, and I think that's right. He needed to oppose it. He needed to say very clearly that all of the hate speech at that action was wrong. And great, I'm very glad he did. Okay. And that's exactly what he should be doing. He should not be saying that people can't demonstrate in front of outside of a shul or a Jewish school if that shul or Jewish school is being used to sell Palestinian land to American investors. And he didn't do that. So he is walking this tightrope, and it's a delicate one. And quite frankly, I think people who support what he's doing need to be more vocal, because the people who are going to attack him every time he doesn't do what they want him to do, which is to sound pro-Israel in his condemnations and to be one-sided in his condemnations and to condemn a pro-Hamas chant but not condemn a pro-JDL chant or a pro-Kach chant. Those people are going to be real loud. So we need to be at least as loud. So I leave it there. And if you found this useful, please share it. Please like, subscribe, and if you can support this work, that would always be really, really deeply appreciated. That's how this work can continue. And I will talk to you soon.